Claire, welcome. It's really nice to have you on the podcast. As Children's Commissioner, obviously you've been a child, so you have personal experience. And so I thought I'd start by asking you about your own childhood and the influences that you brought forward from that.
Oh, kia ora, Robin. It's lovely to join you on this podcast. So thanks for having me. Yes, I think that's something that sort of binds us as humanity, isn't it? That we all were children once. I think that time of childhood is such an important time in all of our lives. It is very formative, and it really does put in place those building blocks for our lifetime outcomes. So I was very fortunate. I had a really loving childhood, grew up. So I was actually born in the Waitakere Ranges at home in Langholm. And so I very much, I think, came into the world with that sound of, kīrero and tui and the manu of the ngahere in my ears and under the shelter of, those giants of the forest, our beautiful kauri trees. And so look, that place of the Waitakere Ranges and Tamaki Makaurau out west is a very important one to me. It really did shape, I think, in part my worldview growing up. We moved when I was about 2 to Titirangi, a place quite nearby. Again, very much like in the bush in our beautiful native ngahere. And I think that's a place I really feel a deep sense of connection to. It's my ngākau place, if you like. I grew up with my mum and dad and my younger brother, Andrew. And also just around the road, I was fortunate that my maternal grandparents lived really close by to us, and they had a really strong hand in my upbringing as well. And I went to school in the local area, so in Titirangi and Glen Eden, and then high school at Avondale College, and all very much places that shaped and had a big influence on me. And then I guess as well, the other thing I reflect on in my childhood is that as a person of that woven heritage, so on my dad's side, I'm from Jawa Tinga, from Central Java in Indonesia. On my mum's side, Pākehā, New Zealander with Scottish and Irish ancestry. And so very much have that woven heritage as part of my story. A very fortunate childhood surrounded by a lot of love. Had a few struggles growing up, I guess, in terms of my personal health. Had a serious illness as a teenager. And I guess that was another factor that probably has shaped me in part into the person who I am today.
I saw that you'd had that experience, and I've just finished doing some work with the Child Cancer Foundation. And I realised that took you into another whole community of people, children, young people who are in an incredibly vulnerable stage of their lives.
Yes, so I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma at age 15. And look, yes, it was a really extremely difficult time in my life. I was so fortunate that, my family wrapped so much love and support and care around me, but it was a real stressor on our family as well. I was so fortunate that my school, so Avondale College at the time, the thing that I wanted most was, just to continue on with a normal childhood, teenagehood at that time and keep engaging in my school and being around my friends, and so the school really supported me with that, which I was very fortunate about. And I guess as well, I knew at the time how fortunate I was to have that access to care through our public health system. But I think looking back, I realised just how fortunate I was. I think about, the incredible care and professionalism and skill of my doctors and nurses, and the kindness that they showed to me through that time, because it was very, very scary, as you know, through your work with the Child Cancer Foundation, great organisation doing incredible things to support tamariki going through cancer and their families. You'll know what a stressful and challenging time it is. And so I just do reflect on that incredible kindness that was shown to me and to my family, that helped us, walk that journey, which was a difficult one. But it taught me a lot about, gratitude, I guess, for the small things, about determination, about having hope as well for the future. And, that's something now that in my current work as Chief Children's Commissioner, I really think it's so important that every single child has a sense of hope for the future. And it saddens me, that not every child has that sense of hope, because even in the darkest times, I think it is important to be able to see a more hopeful and a brighter future and know that better days will come.
Yeah, I understand that one of the formative experiences for you was when you went to school. You went out of that, the warmth of childhood in your small own family community, and then you go to primary school and secondary school, was that you saw poverty in your community. Tell me a little bit about that.
So in Avondale, where I went to high school, I saw the struggles that some of my classmates were going through. I think it's a decile 3 or 4 school. At the time was the largest high school in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I think now it's the 3rd largest. But the school was made up of students from a whole wide range of backgrounds, including different cultures, ethnicities, and I think that was such a rich, diverse place, to form my worldview, if you like. But yes, part of it was seeing, poverty, and I guess deprivation in the community around us there in Avondale. And I know that for some of my classmates, that was a reality of their life every day. So I guess I was also always just mindful of the experience of some of my classmates and the community that I saw around me, mindful of the impact that that has in people's lives. Just because people are experiencing poverty doesn't mean that they are impoverished in terms of love or care or any of that. And the fact is that people who are growing up in that background, we've seen so many incredible stories of what they can have gone on to do. But also being mindful of the fact that poverty does make things really difficult for families, for whānau, and therefore for their children and their young people. And that no, family or whānau in our country should be struggling for the most basic things in life. Every child should be able to grow up with at least the basics and a bit more, so that they can truly flourish to that full potential.
I noticed one of the profiles on you mentions you doing the 40-hour famine, which of course is such a thing for kids in New Zealand schools, and that would have made you, I guess, aware of global issues facing children.
Absolutely. I think, reflecting back on my childhood, for some reason, I was just always interested in, that social justice, causes around human rights, civil rights, how the world, I guess, treats how we treat each other as people in the world, but also how our systems either support or, don't support flourishing outcomes for people. And so, yeah, I remember at school learning about, situations around the world, poverty that was facing children in other countries at far greater scale, I should say, than, what our poverty situation here is in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And that, I guess, was what made me want to get involved in raising money and raising awareness of what was going on for children in other countries, often in countries, marked by war, famine, natural disasters, and the impacts that had followed in terms of the poverty in their lives. And I guess I saw that, doing my little bit in my local community to raise funds and raise awareness of these these issues was one small way that I could make a difference. I remember I used to go during the 40-hour famine and stand in the shopping area of my local community with a big sign explaining what I was doing, and have chats with people, in the community that were passing by, to try and raise that awareness, as well as hopefully raising some funds. Also, I was involved in a range of other, social justice kind of causes. I remember at primary school, our primary school raised a lot of money for Sir Howard Morrison's Ride for Life, which was raising funds for the work of the Life Education Trust. So making sure that every child in Aotearoa, New Zealand, could learn about things like nutrition, how our bodies work, our healthy relationships. And I remember I had the privilege of being the student who got to hand over that money to Sir Howard Morrison as he rode on his horse. I think he rode for over 40 days through the country to raise the profile of that cause. And also, of course, having grown up in the Waitakaris, nature and the environment was always ever present for me and for my peers at school. And so, we'd be out from time to time, doing stream cleanups and war on weeds, and, to take care of the taiao, to take care of Papatūānuku. And we learned a lot about, our interdependence with the natural world around us, and how that biodiversity nourishes us as people, and how we need to take care of it in turn, so that we can sustain it. And I guess I fast forward to, the situation that we're in today with our, changing climate, our climate emergency. And I feel fortunate, that back in my childhood, I was already learning about issues around our environment and growing my consciousness around how to take care of our earth. It saddens me, that we're in the state that we're in now, but I think as well with my generation and generations coming through after me, there is that deep consciousness around things like taking care of our environment, around social justice and human rights, and also the interconnections between these things too, that they are in many ways, interdependent and indivisible, and that we have to be taking care of all of these things holistically, to be both supporting our planet, but also, life on planet Earth going forward as well.
Just listening to you, I'm thinking of the people that would have been wrapped around you as a young person to make those experiences possible. Who was the first person outside of your immediate family who made you feel seen and made you feel as though you could do things? Was there a special teacher or neighbour or?
Yeah, I probably think, back to my creche days and kindy days, and I think about many of the amazing, kindergarten and early childhood teachers. So an amazing woman called Elaine at the creche at Auckland University. My mum was working there at the time, so that was where I went when I was really young. And then Norman and Jenny at Hilling Street, kindy in Green Bay. And then, going through to primary school, I always remember my first teachers there, Mrs. Dickey and Mrs. Portai, and just, how they looked out for me. And I remember actually my first day of school, I really didn't want to be there. I was really, missing kindergarten because that was my safe place, and didn't kind of want to be separated from my mum in particular. And I remember Mrs. Dickey, she was just so kind to me. She, I was crying and she got out her hanky and she gave it to me and she reassured me that everything was going to be okay. And yeah, so reflecting actually on those amazing teachers who were just 100% there for me and my peers. And I think, gave that nourishment in terms of care, but also growth and development and learning about the world around me. It's nice to reflect on that.
It was a question that we did with some leadership interviews, and it was really inspiring to realise that quite often quite light touch contact from somebody outside your family who saw you in some way was so affirming to children. And
Absolutely.
how
And I
lucky you are
think,
to get it.
yeah, totally. And I think that in my current work, that's something that I reflect on a lot, because I do have the chance to be, out and about around the motu, engaging with children and young people in their spaces and places. And often what I hear from them is, oh, it's really cool that the Chief Children's Commissioner actually took the time to show up in, kai kohe, kawaro, porirua, Otatahi, and come to my school or to my club or to my community space. And for me, I'm just like, of course I will. That's such an important part of my job. But it also makes me reflect on the importance of every single child having that person in their life, whether that is someone in their family, someone in their community, someone more widely, who they, as you say, just feel seen by, feel heard by, and someone who I guess they know will always have their back as well, that they can count on to show up for them. I think we cannot underestimate the importance of that, and I really want every single child in our country to have that. I think it's actually quite a simple thing. And often when I'm speaking with, adults or professional bodies, groups of people out in the community, I'll often put a whittle down, a challenge, and say to them, one of the things that you can do to be part of a movement to make sure that we are a child-centered and a child rights respecting country is actually the next time you're in contact with a child or young person, just ask them how they're going, ask them what's on top for them and really take the time to listen, that really listening and focusing. Put your phone down, just focus on them, make eye contact, encourage them, listen to them, ask them how they're doing, and see where the conversation goes, And I think that can be a very simple thing, but a very powerful thing that for most of us, we're able to do that at some point in our life.
Yes. So when you left Avondale, you went to Auckland University and you chose to do law and politics. What, how easy was that decision? What were you thinking in terms of career at that stage?
Oh, I mean, it wasn't an easy decision. I angsted over it. At high school, I really loved a whole range of subjects. I was very involved, for example, in visual arts. So I loved, painting, graphic design. I was very into the arts. I remember I was in our musical in the final year of high school. I also loved sixth form journalism. Really loved, understanding people's story and then bringing it together in a written form. And I also loved, debating at high school as well, working as part of a team to build an argument or a case for something and then making a compelling argument forward on it. And as we've already kind of spoken about, loved, history and learning about the world around me. And so it was a difficult choice for me, what I would go ahead and study. Um, I was tossing up, I remember, between fine arts school, journalism, or going down the law and arts, conjoint degree. In the end, I decided that was the path that I'd go down. I felt that maybe, it could still lead to journalism if I wanted to one day. And I could, keep going with my creative pursuits in my art and my spare time. And so I was really, I guess, Yeah, I felt good about the decision that I ultimately made. I think for me, being able to do the two degrees at the same time was really important because it meant that in my arts subjects, so I had that major in political science and then minors in English history and art history, I got to really keep pursuing those, I guess, more passion interests that I really had. And then in the law, I guess that was where I was really challenged in terms of learning a new discipline, a new vocation, a new way of thinking and of problem solving. I found my first few years at law school were quite a struggle, to be honest. I felt quite a fish out of water in the law school environment. I didn't come from a family who had anyone who had been a lawyer previously. And so I felt that I was really struggling, I guess, to grasp some of the concepts and to be able to apply them, and I guess see how that could be applied in practice.
Mm.
Fortunately, I pushed through, and then in those later years of law school, I was able to pursue some of the more subjects that I guess really spoke to me in the law. So, in relation to international law, human rights, advocacy, those were, I guess, the final 2 years of law school where I got to draw together some of those threads from my arts degree as well.
I was intrigued that you won the Bill Gully Young Corporate Lawyer of the Year award.
Yeah,
I mean,
I
that's
was
a, I would have
surprised
thought
by that too.
that was a quick path to riches, but you chose not to go down the corporate law route.
Yeah, so that prize was awarded by the as it was called then, the Corporate Law Association of New Zealand, which I know on the tin it sounds like it's more in the commercial law world, but it's actually referring to lawyers who work as legal counsel within organisations. And so I was awarded that prize when I was in my first job out of law school, working as a solicitor at the Ministry of Social Development. So I was an in-house legal counsel for the ministry. And that was an amazing, first role out of law school. I feel so fortunate that the ministry took me on. I was the first graduate lawyer that the ministry took on. And my my seniors, my mentors, they were really committed to making sure that I got to experience work in a whole wide range of law. So first of all, for example, I was in our privacy team. Then I moved through to do work around child, youth and family operational law and policy, and then into our policy and legislation legal team. And then I ended up taking on the human rights solicitor role for the ministry, which was a really unique role. And it meant that I got to really focus in on work under the Human Rights Act, under the Social Security Act, and also in relation to child, youth and family matters, including in relation to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. So when I was awarded that Young In-House Lawyer of the Year award, it really was recognition for the work that me and my wider teams that I had the chance to be a part of at the Ministry of Social Development had been doing. And, that award did come as a surprise, but I reflect on it now, and I guess maybe something that stood out was that I was forging a bit of a different path in the law in terms of bringing that focus on human rights, on children's rights, even whilst working within a government department. And I like to think that I was a bit of an internal agent of change to, raise the profile and consciousness and awareness of human rights law, how it is applied here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and especially for children and tamariki, the relevance of, what we do when it comes to legal decisions, policy, system settings, how they impact on children and young people. And so I guess that's a thread that I now pull through into the work that I'm doing today.
And then you went to the Netherlands to Leiden University and really focused on international law for relating to children. and then you did this really interesting work with UNICEF on refugee and migrant children. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. So my time in the Netherlands was just, I feel so fortunate for it. I was supported by both by the Ministry of Social Development to, take a year of study leave and go to the Netherlands and do my master's in advanced studies in public international law. And that was only possible as well through the support of a Rotary scholarship. And so I was very fortunate to be sponsored by Rotary, who covered all my fees and accommodation for that year to enable me to go and study in the Netherlands at a university that is steeped in history in terms of international law. Really one of the founders of international law was right there at Leiden University, Hugo Grotius. And so the history that is immersed and steeped in that university, I really felt so fortunate to be walking amongst that every day in my time at Leiden. The university is really closely located to The Hague, which is, I guess, known as the world capital of international law, because that's where you have a lot of the international legal tribunals. Also, the International Court of Justice is based there. And so that was incredible as well to be so closely connected with those international institutions that uphold and protect international human rights law. And I learned a lot, I guess, through that proximity, but also through being alongside, my classmates and then the teachers who we had the chance to learn from during that time. And my classmates were made up of students from all around the world, from both civil and common law traditions. And we got to learn a lot through that peer-to-peer understanding, because we'd all come from working in spaces connected to law in our home countries as well. And then coming out of my master's study, that was when, so during my year studying for the master's, I did take on an internship with UNICEF based in The Hague. And through that work, I started to really focus in on the rights of children of what at the time were referred to as unaccompanied minor asylum seeker children. So these were children and young people who had come into the Netherlands and other European countries from places that they had escaped war. So at the time from Iraq, Angola, Afghanistan, and often had fled these war-torn places on their own, and also without any protection for their rights. Unfortunately, what was happening at the time was that the Netherlands and other countries were forcibly returning those children and young people to their country of origin without any formal assessment of how that was going to be in line with their rights or their best interests. Obviously, it wasn't. We know that when refugees flee their countries, they are doing that for true fear of persecution and their safety and well-being in their home country. And so through my work with UNICEF that then continued after I finished my master's, I was part of leading this project to advocate for these particular rights, for the rights of these particular children, so that the Dutch and other governments would actually have a best interests approach to decision making around these children and young people. And so that saw me take this advocacy to spaces such as the European Union, also the Council of Europe, advocating on that pan-European level for more child rights friendly approaches to the treatment of these children and young people. And I think back on that advocacy now, and I think one of the things that it taught me is that advocacy is often a long game. It's very rare in the advocacy world, especially in the human rights space, that we see an instant change as a result of the advocacy that we do. And so I was in the Netherlands for a few years after that, but it wasn't until a few years down the track, once I was back in New Zealand and I'd long finished that work, that I got a call from a colleague, and they called to tell me, hey Claire, guess what? The government's actually agreed to reverse its policy in this space and to take a more child rights friendly approach. And that was a satisfying moment to know that I'd been part of getting a piece of work started, which has ultimately led to hopefully better outcomes for those children and young people. But it does show the perseverance that I think working in this space of advocacy and around children's rights, we need to always be perseverant, determined, but know that it is a longer term piece of change that we are often pushing towards.
Yeah, I was really inspired by that, and it made me think of all those boys who were on the Tampa, which was such a horrible experience. But also too, having read or heard a couple of stories from people whose families had tried to send the oldest son away because their fear was that the whole family would be wiped out through whatever was going on in their countries. And the thought of those children just being sent back, I had no idea that had been policy. It's interesting because you then went into these advocacy roles with World Vision and Barnardos. What do NGOs bring to that process of advocacy and change that's unique?
Mm. I think that the role of civil society when it comes to societal change and advocacy, including in the children's rights space, it is a really important space and role that NGOs and wider civil society in Aotearoa, including iwi, hapu, kaupapa Māori organisations, that role is an important one and it is a distinct one. I think the thing that I learnt through my work with World Vision Australia and then with Barnardos here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is that there is a real power and credibility in bringing forward advocacy that is informed by the direct work that that organisation is doing on the ground at Flax Roots with the people who it then is advocating to seek change on behalf of. Because I think that direct knowledge and observation and experience, and hopefully to be able to amplify the lived experience of the people being served, to bring that forward in advocacy is really powerful. And I like to think that where possible, and I know that, NGOs are often so constrained by the funds that they have in their resourcing situation. But where possible, I do think that that sort of obligation is there to be able to advocate and bring forward and amplify on behalf of the people being served the change that's needed at the systemic level. And I think that I got to really see that in action at World Vision Australia and at Barnardos. It made me realise that when I went into a room with decision makers and brought forward an advocacy call to action, that I was able to back that up with, and here's what we've seen in the work that we do, that the things that work, the things that are challenges and that are barriers that need to be removed. I saw that decision makers really could connect with that, and it did give that credibility. And then I guess working at the UN level as well, I've seen the importance of the voice of civil society, because very often, the government or the state has a particular view when it comes to human rights, of the steps that it's taking to protect human rights. But then alongside that, to hear the perspective of civil society, and also, alongside independent bodies and institutions like the one that I now lead, Mana Children and Young People's Commission, bringing forward that multiplicity of views is really important. And I've seen that in practice. Last year, I went to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child for the 6th periodic review of New Zealand under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I was there at the time as part of civil society, as part of the Children's Rights Alliance Aotearoa New Zealand. And I saw that process of working alongside the then Children's Commissioner, our government delegation, to bring forward those various views to the Committee on the Rights of the Child so it could form a holistic and well-rounded and well-informed view of what was going on for children when it came to their rights here in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Which segues nicely into you're now in this role. What are the issues that you're seeing and what are you hearing from young people?
Well, the first thing to say there is just what a privilege and a huge responsibility it is to hold this role as Chief Children's Commissioner. Those of us who are in this role are only in it for a time, and I very much am committed to, while I am the kaitiaki of this role, I will do the absolute best that I can to serve our nation's children and young people and to advance and promote and do my part to protect their rights, but also to amplify their views and experiences and their perspectives. The first thing that I think of in response to your question is just how incredible our nation's children and young people are, and that they are already in many spaces and places leading the change that we need to see to really give full flourishing to their rights in practice. Alongside that, though, I think it's really important that we recognise and protect the fact that every child should get to have a childhood and to just be a child and a young person. And where we can as adults, let's lift off some of those big, concerns and worries and do our part to make the change on the things that children and young people are calling for change on. Things like, responding to our climate emergency, making sure that we are playing our part to protect Papatūānuku so that there is actually a planet on which children and young people can inhabit and flourish in the future. And I like to remember that, a child who is born today will very likely still be alive in the year 2100. And so the decisions that we make today, especially at that governmental and systemic level, the people who are going to deal with the consequences of those for the longest time are our children and our young people. And so remembering to always ground our decisions in what will serve them well and what will uphold their rights, I think is so very crucial. And then in terms of some of the big issues and the big challenges that I see before us, whilst the majority of children and young people in our country are doing really well and are thriving and are having good childhoods, there is a significant proportion of our child and youth population who that is not their reality. For example, we have 12.5% of children living in material hardship. For our mokopuna Māori, that jumps up to, over 20% in material hardship, and even higher for our Pacific mokopuna at, I think, 28% living in material hardship. That's going without 6 or more of those basic items that every child should have just to be able to, have a good start in life. And then if we look at our situation around child abuse and neglect, we have really high rates of child abuse in this country when we look alongside our peers in the OECD. So that's that group of, relatively rich, wealthy nations. The fact that we, on average, have one child dying every 7 weeks by homicide, being killed by homicide. That is so deeply unacceptable, and I think we can all agree that that is not the kind of country that we want to be. And then when it comes to, children's mental health, we've been hearing for a long time from children and young people that they are struggling with their mental health. things like anxiety, depression, and then at the really hard end of things, suicide. The fact that we still have one of the highest youth suicide rates in the world is deeply troubling. The fact that we have high rates of children and young people being bullied. I think the last statistics I saw, over 30% of year 9 students saying that they were experiencing bullying at least one time in the past month when they were surveyed. These are not the kinds of childhood experiences that we want children and young people in Aotearoa to be having. I think the fact that we are a small, relatively rich nation does mean that we have the wherewithal to be addressing these issues, but it does take systemic change, I believe. It does require us to really lean in once and for all to delivering on the full promise of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And those two documents are very much mutually reinforcing when it comes to children's rights. They both highlight, the importance of whakapapa, of whānau, of children and young people growing up in that situation of love, happiness, and understanding, and to be nurtured as the taonga that they are, the precious treasures that they are. So I guess taken together, it's clear, that I think we do need systemic change, significant change when it comes to the rights and the well-being of our children and young people. But I think one place that we can really strongly start is to listen deeply to what children and young people are telling us about their lived experiences, about their perspectives on the world and on their lives, and also around their solutions for change. And often I hear them bringing forward such powerful solutions for change, grounded in deep wisdom. And I think when we combine their views and solutions together with the wider data, evidence, research, and rangahau, we have all the solutions in front of us. It now is just about making those, policy and legislative choices, and then choices collectively as a society about how we really want to treat, respect, see, and value our children and young people.
I guess a sort of final question is around initiatives that you're seeing that give you some hope about the way things are happening. The possibility for effective change. Like I noticed that you'd mentioned Mā Te Huruhuru, the housing project. I was thinking of Voice Whakarongo Mai and how powerful that group of young people have been in shaping something that's going to make life better for kids coming out of care. So what gives you a sense of possibility, I guess?
I think it actually goes back to what I was mentioning earlier, which is around children and young people being supported and facilitated to bring forward their solutions and to shape the change that they need to see in their lives and that will serve other children and young people well. And I think both of those initiatives that you've mentioned there, something that they have in common is that the experience, the lived experience of children and young people is at the absolute centre of what those initiatives are doing. You have teams of people who are truly, deeply listening to what it is that children and young people are saying has worked for them or hasn't worked for them. And then they've gone to work and put in place, the dreams and the aspirations of those children and young people so that others can have better experiences. And I think that is so very important when it comes to especially working with children and young people who are in those more disadvantaged situations. So with Voice Whakarongo Mai, that focus on children and young people in our care and custody system in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And we've seen seeing their powerful advocacy coming forward, but also what you don't see in the background is how the young people have a real hand in shaping how that organisation works. For example, they have regional youth councils who are really shaping forward the experience of support for children and young people in care at that more localised regional level. So I think that's really positive. And then when I've had the privilege of going to visit at Mate Huruhuru in Tamaki Makaurau, which is a kaupapa Māori organisation focused on rangatahi, part of what they have done is to set up a papakainga youth transitional housing initiative. And I've had the privilege to go and spend time in that space with the rangatahi there. And what I have heard from them is that, you know, unfortunately, their lives have often been marked by trauma, complex family breakdowns, not having enough resource around them to fully flourish. And what they've said to me is that, you know, they just wanted a place where they could belong, where they could be loved, experience that aroha, that family and whānau environment, and be able to be believed in, you know, to flourish to that full independence. And that's what I see Mahera and her team at Mate Huruhuru have created in their beautiful papakainga there in Tamaki Makaurau. But, you know, around the motu, I have the privilege of being able to visit many of these incredible initiatives. What I have seen as well is the importance of culture and whakapapa and mokopuna Māori being able to be immersed in their taha Māori, in their mātauranga Māori, the stories of their tipuna, their pūrākau of their whenua, of their iwi, of their hapu, and the strength that that gives them to be able to know their identity, know their tangata kuiho, their whakapapa, and stand in that mana. I've seen that in places like Mahuru, which is a iwi run remand initiative in Te Tai Tokoro, run by Ngāpuhi Iwi Social Services. I've seen that in an incredible place of learning called Te Puna o Manga Tangaroa in Kaikohe, which is a full immersion kaupapa Māori and reo turi early childhood care and learning space. And I've also seen as well, you know, the power of young people being able to lead forward in the spaces that are important to them. I think about mokopuna whaikaha who lead, I lead, and work with I lead. So disabled children and young people who are really at the forefront of advocating for the systemic changes that are needed. So, you know, these are just some of the incredible initiatives that I've had the privilege to see and connect with so far. I know that there are so many more out there around the motu, initiatives working genuinely with children and young people to drive forward to that systemic change. But I shouldn't it would be remiss of me to not mention the systemic barriers that are often in the way of these initiatives. And I really would like to see progress so that actually we remove a whole lot of these barriers out of the way. We make sure that these initiatives and others like them that work for children and young people are adequately invested in, embedded, scaled so that, you know, children and young people around the country can have a consistent experience of these amazing services that can support them and their outcomes.
Claire, thank you so much for coming on to the 10 for 10 podcast, and thank you for your mahi, and thank you for, I think, giving me an insight into what's needed and what's possible.
E mihi ana ki a koe, Robin. It's been such a pleasure to be in kōrero with you. And as we say at Mana Mokopuna, we speak of our vision, kia kuru pounamu te rongo, that all mokopuna live their best lives. I think that is really what we want to see, and I invite everyone in our country to be part of a collective movement and commitment to really focus on the rights and the well-being of all of our children and young people.
Thanks, Claire.